Hello once again, friends, neighbors, and fellow Christians, and welcome back to another video in this series. I believe this is number 19, and this is our series where we are debunking the typical objections that people bring up from time after time after time, over and over again, day after day, after week, after month, and on they go with these same tired, worn out, typical objections, again, that are raised against the idea and from the viewpoint of realized eschatology. And I thank you for your time that you take in listening and watching these videos, and I hope that they are a blessing to you. I hope that if they are, that you will tell your friends and neighbors, your fellow Christians about these videos, and that you'll encourage them to subscribe to this channel, and so that they can receive notifications each time that a new video is posted. And as I said, we are continuing in this series of studies where we are considering these typical objections which are raised against realized eschatology, also referred to as preterism. Now, we have been looking at a prophecy in Isaiah of the last days, day of the Lord judgment against Old Covenant Israel for their sins of idolatry, for breaking the covenant, and shedding the blood of the prophets. And we are on our way to studying 2 Peter chapter 3, which is the go-to passage for futurists, which, in their minds, is a body slam to fulfilled eschatology. I mean, after all, just look around, and we see that the earth and the universe still exists, right? Well, you know, that's what I used to think, until I realized that Peter said he was reminding his readers of what the holy prophets predicted. So this is why we've been looking at some of the eschatological tenets in the last days prediction found in Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, particularly in chapter 2, verses 10, 19, and 21, which predicted that in the last days, persecutorial, backsliding, idolatrous Israel would be punished with everlasting destruction, quote, from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. Quoted verbatim by Paul out of the Septuagint in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, as he posits the fulfillment of this last days prophecy during the lifetime of the Thessalonian Christians. And remember that Peter said Paul wrote in all his epistles of these things, that is, the day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night. So Peter's day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night was Paul's day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night. Therefore, facts which can be established regarding Paul's day of the Lord predictions in his Thessalonian epistles must also hold true for Peter's day of the Lord predictions. After all, this is just good hermeneutics. Now, in the last video, we considered another eschatological tenet which is within this same context of a last days, day of the Lord judgment, and that was when men would run to the rocks and the mountains and to hide from the presence of the Lord. And I demonstrated in the previous video how and why this is not an end of time scene. This is not end of time lingo. So again, if you missed that, please go back and watch that video. If you're new to the series, again, please go back to the beginning, grab you a cup of coffee, sit down and start watching. Take notes if you'd like. Stop the video, pause the video, look these passages up, study the Bible for yourself, friends. This is not end of time lingo. And again, as I said in the previous video, I demonstrate how and why that the men running to the rocks and the hills and so forth, that's not end of time language, okay? That's war language. So if you haven't seen that, go back and watch that. Now, today, I want to look at yet another eschatological tenet from this very same context and prophecy of a last days, day of the Lord judgment. And we find this in two of the very same statements which contain the previous two tenets that we've looked at. And we'll go here, and I want you to look at this. We'll look at this together. And again, this is in Isaiah chapter 2. And again, this is concerning Judah and Jerusalem. and it would be in the last days. So here is the predicted time frame, and it would be in the time frame of when the Lord's house would be established and when he would judge among the nations. Okay, it would be a time of famine, it would be a time of oppression, it would be again a time of judgment. He says here, the spoil of the poor is in your houses, and again, remember that we looked at that. That's what James said in James chapter 5 there, and you can again pause the video, you can read that passage there. This would be a time of war. He says, thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war. Again, compare that to Luke 21, especially verse 24 there, where he says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And that is parallel with Revelation 11 verses 1 and 2, and you can look that up and read that. So when we look at this then, that this is concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It would be in the last days. It would be in the time frame of when the Lord's house would be established, the everlasting kingdom, the church, that he'd judge among the nations. And we find this language here, that in that day, and the idols he shall utterly abolish. They shall go into the holes of the rocks and in the caves of the earth. Again, that was in our previous video. For fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty, again, which Paul quotes verbatim in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. But here's what I want you to look at today. When, there's a time word, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Do you see that? And it is repeated in verse 21. They go to the clefts of the rocks, the tops of the ragged rocks, for fear of the Lord, for the glory of the majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. Okay, so I want us to look at this language here of shaking the earth, the shaking of heavens and earth, okay? Because, again, we want to look at this language because many people are confused because they don't study the Old Testament language here, and they when they read something about a great earthquake, or they read something about heavens and earth being shaken, then they automatically think, well, this is end of time language. And I'm going to show you again why this is not end of time language. And we want to look at a lot of these passages here as examples. Okay, for instance, let's look at Psalms chapter 18. And this is where David called upon the Lord to protect him from his enemy, Saul, who was out to kill him. And he says, we'll just go there. He says, the sorrows of death compassed me about, the floods of ungodly men made me afraid, the sorrows of hell compassed me about, the snares of death prevented me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him, even into his ears. Now, notice what happens. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken, because he was wroth. Okay, do you see that there? Do you see the language there? All right. There went up smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. He bowed the heavens and came down. You see that? Jehovah came down out of the heavens. You see that? But the earth shook and trembled. Smoke went out of his nostrils. Jehovah came down out of the heavens. But see, nobody saw Jehovah, did they? They didn't see this smoke out of his nostrils, right? And he says the earth shook and trembled because he, Jehovah, was wroth. So you see, again, this is not end of time language. And as we keep on reading, the Lord also thundered in the heavens. You see that? And the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. Yea, he sent out arrows and scattered them. He shot out lightnings and discomfited them. He delivered me from my strong enemy and from them which hated me. Do you see that? This was David's prayer to Jehovah. And this was how David depicted Jehovah's response in quelling the enemy. Do you see that? You see how simple that is? And it's obvious this was not end of time language because the earth is still here. But yet the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills were moved and shaken. Jehovah came down out of the heavens. You see that? And he says here that the Lord thundered in the heavens. The highest gave his, okay. All right, let's look at another passage. And this is in Isaiah 13. And this is the predicted destruction that was coming upon Babylon. Okay, and it is called the Day of the Lord. Now, I know we've looked at some of these passages in previous videos, and that's why I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these. I just want you to notice these particular elements or tenets which are mentioned in these in this language here. So, as we look then, again, this is termed the Day of the Lord. You see that? The Day of the Lord. The stars of heaven, the constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in his going forth. The moon shall not cause her light to shine. Verse 13, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. Okay, now again, this was the predicted destruction that was coming upon Babylon, and that happened and was taking place many, many centuries ago. Okay, but yet the cosmos remained unaffected because it's still here, and time did not end, did it? Because we're still here and time continues on. So again, this is why I say here we have this language that he was going to shake the heavens and the earth, just like we see there in Isaiah chapter 2, that he would there'd be a great shaking and the earth would be shook. Again, we see the same language here, and it's obvious, it is indisputable that this is not, was not end of time language, because this took place many, many centuries ago. All right, again, let's look at Joel chapter 3. Now, again, if we back up, we have looked at this, as I said, in previous videos. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but you will recall that on the day of Pentecost, when the multitude accused the apostles of being drunk because they didn't understand what was going on with the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. They accused him of being drunk. Peter stood up and said, these men are not drunk as you suppose, seeing it is but the third hour of the day. But this is that was spoken by the prophet Joel. And he quotes right here from Joel 2:28 and following. Okay, he quotes that on Pentecost Day, and he even says there, the sun shall be darkened, or excuse me, the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. Now, you probably know this, but if you don't, bear with me here. Those of you who already know this, bear with me as I point this out. That when these scriptures and these things were written, they didn't have chapter and verse format, okay? So when we come to the end of this chapter, there was no break in the chapter, okay? There was no break in the text. So when we come to the very next words off the pen of the prophet, he says for. You see that? See that as a connective particle, as a conjunction. And it joins what he is about to say with what he has just said. So he says, for, behold, in those days and in that time. So in what days and in what time? Well, what he just said, that it would come, and Peter interpreted verse 28 here, that it'll come to pass afterward. Peter interpreted that as it'll come to pass in the last days. Okay? And so Joel goes on and says, in those days and in that time. Okay? You see that? So he says then, and we'll skip on down here again, you can pause the video, read all the text, but for time constraint, we're just going to come down to look at this language here. So again, this is harvest language, and we looked at this in the previous video, and we showed how, and we compared this with in Revelation, I believe chapter 14, how that these things are parallel. Okay, but notice here, again, we have this language. It's called the Day of the Lord. The sun and the moon will be darkened. The stars shall withdraw their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. Notice, the heavens and the earth shall shake. You see that? So here again is this language of the shaking of heavens and earth. But now here's what I want you to notice. Again, look at the verse. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, the stars shall withdraw their shining, the heavens and the earth shall shake. Do you see that? Now watch this. When we go to Matthew 24, Jesus quotes this prophecy. And he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, which he just quoted from Daniel 12, verses 1 and 2, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Do you see that? This is Jesus quoting, interpreting, and applying the language of Joel 3 that we just looked at. Okay, and it's almost a verbatim quote. Okay, so I mean there's no question that he is quoting, citing, echoing the prophecy of Joel 3 that we just looked at. And he says that the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And this is when the Son of Man would come in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory at the sound of the great trumpet. All right, and this is also reiterated in Mark's version, there in Mark 13. So again, you can go there and read that text. It says basically the same thing. But I want to go then to Hebrews chapter 12, and I want you to notice this here. Again, we're considering this language of the powers of the heavens being shaken, heaven and earth being shaken. Okay, so excuse me. So when we come then to Hebrews chapter 12, we find here the writer saying, he says, for you know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. For you are not come unto the mount that might be touched, and that burned with fire, nor unto blackness, and darkness, and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, which voice they that heard entreated that the word should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure that which was commanded. And if so much as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. Okay, so now the writer, that I believe is Paul, he said, you're not come unto the mount, and that's Mount Sinai. Okay, you're not come to Mount Sinai. Okay, he says, but you are come unto the Mount Zion. You are come unto Mount Zion. Okay, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. See that you refuse not him that speaketh. For if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven. Now notice this, whose voice then shook the earth. But now, and that's Paul's now, that's the Hebrew writer's now. Okay, that's not your now, that's not my now, that's Paul's now. But now he hath promised, saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. And okay, I'm going to read that again. He says, whose voice then shook the earth, but now hath he promised, saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken. Now notice that, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. Now, again, I want you to notice that he says here, now you're not come to Mount Sinai, okay? You're come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem. And he says this voice here that shook the earth, he has promised, saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only. So, you know, one question that I've asked is, How many times is yet once more? Do you see that? You see, yet once more is only one. So if we pin down the when of this yet once more, then we would eliminate anything following this, right? So what we need to realize here is that the writer is quoting from Haggai chapter 2, where the prophet said, "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once, in a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth." Now recall that back in chapter 9 of Hebrews, that the writer said that unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. And then in chapter 10, about verse 35 I believe, he said, he that shall come will come and will not tarry. And he said he will in a very, very little while. And here in chapter 12 then, we find that he is quoting from Haggai, and saying yet once more, and Haggai said, yet once more it is a little while. You see that? And I will shake the heavens and the earth. So again, there's that language again. I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. Okay, again, if you drop on down in the same chapter there of Haggai, he says in verse 22, and I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms. Now notice, he says, speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I will shake the heavens and the earth. Okay, again, there's that language that we were considering from Isaiah chapter 2, verses 19 and 21. And he says, I will shake the heavens and the earth, verse 21, and I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms, and I will destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the heathen, and I will overthrow the chariots and those that ride in them, and the horses and the riders shall come down, every one by the sword of his brother. So Haggai is defining what this language of shaking heavens and earth means. Okay, this is how the Bible defines, this is how Scripture interprets Scripture. And Haggai interprets and defines the shaking of heavens and earth as overthrowing the throne of kingdoms and destroying the strength of the kingdoms of the heathen. Okay, and again he said, for thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. And this is what we find here in Hebrews 12 and verse 27, where he says that this word yet once more signifies the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. So when we look at these things then, excuse me while I close the tab here, then we see that when we look again at Hebrews 12, and we notice that Paul is he's using literal clouds and fire, thundering, and the shaking of a physical landmass on that mountain. Okay, when he said again in verse 18 of Hebrews 12, he says, you are not come into the mount that might be touched and that burn with fire, nor into blackness and darkness and tempest, the sound of a trumpet, the voice of words, which voice they that heard entreated that the word should not be spoken to them any more, for they could not endure that which was commanded. And if so much as a beast touched the mountain, it should be stoned or thrust through with a dart. So he is using this literal, physical event, okay, the mountain shaking, the thundering, and so forth. And I remember years ago, I came out here to my study and I sat down, and I had my computer tower. It sat right here on my desk, and lightning struck a big white oak tree right out there in the front yard, and maybe 100 feet from the door here in the front of the house. And the concussion, and if you've ever been around a close lightning strike, then you know it is a flashbang scenario. Okay, it's literally flashbang synonymous, or at the same time, okay? And the concussion literally blew dust out of my computer tower. It was floating in the air. So, I mean, it's no wonder that these people were literally scared out of their wits when this mountain was trembling and thundering and shaking, and there was fire and smoke and so forth. And Paul is using this literal physical event and describing that. And he says, now that is not what you have come to. Okay? So then when we come down to verse 26, he says, whose voice shook the earth, and that's what he was talking about, Mount Sinai. And then he says in verse 27, yet once more, signifies that it indicates plainly that the physical things made with hands are being shaken. Okay? Now Paul is referring to the Jewish temple, which was made with hands. If you recall, the false witnesses that were brought in and set up against Jesus, they accused him of saying that he would destroy this temple that is made with hands. Mark 14 and verse 58. And that wasn't what he said, but that's what they accused him of saying, this temple that is made with hands. Paul said, for we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 1. Oh, and by the way, Vincent says that earthly here, for we know that if our earthly house, Vincent says that earthly means upon the earth, not made of the earth, which will be like what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 47, the first man is of the earth, earthy. So what this means is, this is covenantal language of the corporate body of Judaism, okay? For if we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, oh, by the way, dissolved here comes from the Greek term kataluo. And it is the same term used in Jesus' statement when he said, there shall not be left one stone here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Same word. Oh, and by the way, Peter uses the same term, less the prefix kata, he uses luo, when he says, seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved. Oh, and by the way, that is in the present tense. Get your interlinear and look that up. Seeing then that all these things are being dissolved. Now, don't take my word for it. Get your interlinear out and look that up. That's in the present tense. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming, parousia, of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved. So again, present tense, and then shall be. So we have the idea here again of prolepsis. It was ongoing. It was already underway. It was soon going to be fulfilled and completed. 2 Peter 3 verses 11 and 12. Now, Paul said, but Christ, being come a high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building. Hebrews 9 verse 11. Again, Paul said, for Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands. Do you get that? Into the holy places made with hands. That's the temple. That's the earthly temple. Okay? Which are figures of the true. Okay? Catch that? Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. That's chapter 9 of Hebrews. That's verse 24. So again, when we look at verse 26 here of chapter 12, when he said, whose voice shook the earth, and then verse 27, when he says, yet once more, well, this signifies the removal of the things which were made What's he talking about? What's the context? The temple, Judaism, those things that were made. Okay, yet once more signifies the removal of those things which are made, which were being shaken. Then we have a literal, physical event which would give evidence. It would indicate, it would signify the removal of things made so that the unshakable things would remain. And what did Paul specify in this text and in this context? What was unshakable? Verse 28. Wherefore we receiving, again, that's present tense. Wherefore we receiving an unshakable kingdom. Do you see that? And thus the dissolution of the Jewish temple would bring the Jewish age to its consummation. It would signal and be the sign of the parousia of the Son of Man coming in his kingdom with power and great glory. The kingdom which Jesus said would come without observation. So again, just as in the parables which Jesus used physical depictions to teach the people various aspects of the approaching spiritual kingdom, Paul uses an impending physical event to demonstrate a spiritual reality, and that is the arrival of the everlasting messianic kingdom. Now, Futurism turns this language upside down, backwards, and inside out by reconstructing and redefining the language of a spiritual fulfillment into a physical event at this imaginary end of time. Futurism totally ignores the fact that Paul's eschatology was nothing more than what Moses and the prophets predicted would come. Acts 26 and verse 22. Futurism totally ignores the fact that Peter is reminding his audience of what the holy prophets predicted. Again, 2 Peter 3, verses 1 and 2. Futurism totally ignores the fact that Peter's day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night was Paul's day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night. And Futurism totally ignores the fact that Paul is quoting verbatim out of the Septuagint from a last days day of the Lord prediction of judgment against Israel, in which some would escape this day of the Lord judgment. And this is exactly what Paul told the Thessalonian Christians, is that they would escape this day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night. But their persecutorial Jewish countrymen would not escape, and they would be destroyed when the Lord would be revealed from heaven in flaming fire, and that they would be punished with everlasting destruction, again, quote, from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. Isaiah 2, verses 10, 19, and 21. And when this would happen, men would run to the rocks and to the mountains to hide, and this would be when the heavens and the earth would be shaken. Again, as we have just read and demonstrated here in Hebrews 12, that this cannot be end of time language. This was all first century predictions. These were all first century occurrences transpiring in the last days of Old Covenant Israel at the consummation of the Jewish age, when every stone of the temple would be dissolved, kataluo, thrown down. Now, remember that Paul said, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. Romans 15:4. Excuse me. And remember that I told you that I was going to put you to the test to see if you actually believe those words which we have espoused through the decades. So, do you really believe that? Do you really believe that whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning? Now, I'm serious. Do you believe that? You see, this is the groundwork, this is the foundation, this is the basis for what Peter will predict in 2 Peter chapter 3. And again, this is why that we are going back and examining what Moses and the prophets predicted would come to pass in the last days. Okay? Now, as to bring this video to a close, I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to watch these videos, to study along with us. And again, take the time to pause the video if necessary, to read these passages, read above and below. I'm not trying to hide anything from you. I would never do that because I know how that feels. Because I've had things hidden from me. I have been badgered into not studying certain things. And I know how degrading that is. And I would never do that to you. I don't want to hide anything from you. I don't want you to hide anything from me. And if you see something that I am misrepresenting, then you tell me, okay? I'll be one of the few people that will actually tell you you're my friend. Now, that's something, again, that we've preached all through the years. And when I have learned things that I didn't know before and pointed them out to all these people that have been saying this, well, it turns out they're liars, okay? Just to be blunt, and not trying to be rude or disrespectful, but just to be blunt. That's a fact. People who have said this all through the decades that I've heard preach this time after time after time after time. If you can show me where I'm wrong, well, I'll consider you my friend. Well, that's not the way it happened. Not near. So I'll be one of the few people that will consider you my friend if you can show me where I'm wrong. And if you can properly exegete the scriptures and show me where I'm mistaken, I'll change. Okay? That's as honest as I can be with me. That's as honest as I can be with the scriptures, and that's as honest as I can be with you. Okay? So again, please study the Bible for yourself. Okay? And again, if you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button down here in the corner, and so you'll receive notifications when we post a new video. And study these things with us. And I hope that these things and these thoughts are a blessing to you. And again, if they are, please share these with your friends and neighbors to get more subscribers to come and to study with us from the Word of God. So again, until our next video, may God bless you in your studies, and you have a blessed day. Thank you.